On a sunny afternoon in a crowded town square, a powerful rally for justice takes a shocking turn when a prominent politician publicly slaps a respected activist. The crowd gasps, cameras roll, and the incident goes viral within hours. But what no one sees coming is how this single act ignites a movement, uncovers deep corruption, and leads to a career-ending twist for the politician. This is the story of dignity, justice, and an unforgettable reckoning, one that will leave you speechless. Power, wealth, or a high rank may give you a sense of superiority for a moment, but remember, the day always comes when you're held accountable for your actions. Racism, belittling communities, or disrespecting others based on religion may seem unnoticed now, but justice has a way of finding its mark. Respect is not just about others. It defines who you truly are. Think about it. What will your legacy be? Here in the United States, the law is equal for everyone, no matter your community, race, or religion. Diversity is what makes America strong, and unity is our greatest power. We stand together, respecting one another and sharing a deep love for our country. Patriotism is not just about flags or borders. It's about embracing every individual who calls this land home. In the USA, injustice has no place. Together we uphold justice, equality, and the shared dream of freedom. We love the USA, and the USA loves all of us. Comments below where you're watching from, and if you like and love our story, kindly subscribe our channel. Life, inspirational, and motivational tales that explore themes of love, unity, and patriotism. Stay with us always for interesting stories. Thanks. Let's start the story. The square was alive with the sounds of change, a symphony of chants, cheers, and impassioned voices rising in unity under the bright afternoon sun. Vibrant signs waved high above the heads of the gathered crowd, their bold letters calling for justice, equality, and an end to division. The town square, usually bustling with shoppers and street performers, had transformed into the heart of a movement, pulsating with the energy of those who refused to remain silent any longer. Marcus Bennett, the rally's keynote speaker, stood at the center of the crowd on a small wooden platform. His presence was commanding but not intimidating. Dressed simply in a button-down shirt and slacks, his calm yet powerful voice carried over the noise, captivating the audience. His words were measured, precise, and deeply resonant. Change doesn't come through silence, Marcus declared, his tone unwavering. It comes through action, through accountability, and through understanding. Today we stand here not as divided groups, but as one community, demanding what is right, what is fair, and what is just. Cheers erupted as Marcus spoke, his supporters clapping and chanting his name. Even those in the crowd who had initially been indifferent found themselves drawn to his words, nodding along as he painted a vision of a better, more unified town. But not everyone in the square shared the enthusiasm. At the edge of the gathering, William Hartford stood, his face a mask of disdain. His tailored suit and polished shoes stood in stark contrast to the casual attire of the crowd, as did the smug, almost mocking smirk on his face. Hartford, a well-known local politician, had built his career on divisive rhetoric, pandering to fear and ignorance. Though his supporters were fewer in number, their presence was palpable, a stark reminder of the barriers Marcus was fighting to dismantle. As Marcus continued his speech, Hartford's irritation grew. He couldn't bear the cheers, the claps, or the way Marcus's words cut through the lies he'd spun for years. The activist wasn't just addressing the crowd. He was dismantling Hartford's carefully constructed narrative, piece by piece. Finally, Hartford couldn't hold back any longer. He stepped forward, his voice sharp and cutting as he interrupted. "Enough of this nonsense," he barked, silencing part of the crowd. "You stand here preaching unity, but all you do is sow division. You and your so-called movement are nothing but troublemakers, turning neighbor against neighbor with your baseless accusations." A hush fell over the square as all eyes turned to Hartford. Marcus paused, his expression calm but firm. He turned to face the politician, his composure unshaken. "Mr. Hartford," Marcus began, his voice steady, "unity is not built on ignoring injustices. It is built on addressing them openly, honestly, and with courage. Your words speak of division, but your actions have long demonstrated where the real source of conflict lies." The crowd erupted into cheers once again, Marcus's supporters invigorated by his unflinching response. Hartford's face turned red, his composure slipping, as Marcus's words cut deep. "Don't lecture me," Hartford spat, stepping closer. "You think you're better than me? You think standing on that stage makes you a leader? You're nothing but a troublemaker, and Bestand would be better off without you." Marcus remained rooted, his gaze locked on Hartford's. "Leadership isn't about silencing others," he replied calmly. "It's about listening, understanding, and fighting for what's right, even when it's hard. That's what this town deserves. That's what these people deserve." The crowd roared, and Hartford's humiliation was complete. He glanced around, seeing the phones raised, the cameras pointed at him, and the sea of faces united against him. His anger boiled over, blinding him to reason. In a sudden, shocking movement, he stepped onto the platform and slapped Marcus across the face. The sound reverberated through the square, silencing the cheers in an instant. Gasps rippled through the crowd as Marcus staggered slightly but did not fall. He stood there, his hand slowly coming up to his cheek, his face a mix of shock and disbelief. For a moment, the entire square seemed to hold its breath. Marcus's supporters surged forward, their outrage palpable, but Marcus raised a hand, stopping them. He met Hartford's glare with a calm, piercing gaze, his silence speaking louder than any words. Around them, the crowd began to murmur, some shouting at Hartford while others pulled out their phones to record the aftermath. Among them was a journalist, her camera capturing every second of the unfolding drama. Hartford, still seething, took a step back, realizing too late what he had done. His bravado faltered as the weight of the crowd's judgment settled on him. He opened his mouth to speak, but no words came. The damage was done. Marcus finally broke the silence, his voice steady but tinged with a quiet intensity. "This," he said, gesturing to Hartford, "is the kind of behavior we must end. Not with violence, not with anger, but with truth, accountability, and the unwavering demand for justice." The crowd erupted once more, the cheers even louder than before. As Hartford slunk back into the crowd, his supporters began to scatter, their confidence shaken. Marcus stood tall, his resolve unbroken, knowing this was only the beginning of a fight that had just gained a new level of urgency. The atmosphere in the square was electric with tension following the shocking incident. "Please," he said, his voice measured and steady, cutting through the noise, "let us not give in to anger. What happened here today does not define us. It tests us, and we must show that we are stronger than hate." The crowd hesitated, their collective outrage simmering just beneath the surface. Slowly, his words began to take hold. Supporters lowered their raised fists, their expression softening as Marcus's unshakable composure steadied their own emotions. The journalists, cameras still rolling, captured every word and every nuance of the scene. Among them, one reporter whispered into her microphone, "This moment, it's extraordinary. Marcus Bennett has just shown the kind of restraint and leadership we so desperately need." William Hartford stood at the edge of the platform, his chest heaving with residual fury, his face, still red from anger and embarrassment, twisted into a sneer. "I acted on principle," he barked, addressing no one in particular but loud enough for the cameras to catch his words. "This so-called activist has been spreading lies and division for too long. I won't stand by and let him poison this town." But his words rang hollow, even to his own supporters. The slap, seen by hundreds in the square and soon to be seen by millions online, was impossible to justify. Some of his followers shifted uncomfortably, glancing at the phones held high by onlookers. The moment had already been immortalized in video clips and photos, and the tide had already shifted in the stands. Within minutes, the footage began to circulate on social media. One video captioned, "Local politicians slaps activist during equality rally," gained traction at lightning speed. Retweets, shares, and comments poured in from across the country. People were outraged, condemning Hartford's actions as an abuse of power and a blatant display of prejudice. Hashtags like "Justice for Marcus" and "Accountability Now" began trending within hours, drawing attention from major news outlets. Marcus's composure became a symbol of dignity under fire. Clips of his calm response and calls for peace were shared alongside the slap, with commentators praising his restraint. Prominent figures in activism and politics voiced their support, amplifying his message of nonviolence and justice. "This," one tweet read, "is what true leadership looks like." Meanwhile, Hartford found himself at the center of a digital firestorm. Posts lambasting his behavior flooded his social media accounts. His supporters tried to rally behind him, framing the slap as a moment of frustration or as standing up for his beliefs, but their voices were drowned out by the overwhelming wave of criticism. Memes mocking Hartford's outburst began to spread, further tarnishing his image. In the midst of the uproar, Marcus remained silent. Friends, allies, and journalists bombarded him with questions and suggestions. "You have every right to press charges," one close friend insisted. "This is your moment to make him pay." Others urged him to release a statement or capitalize on the public's support. Marcus, a local activist, said, "This is bigger than you now. People are watching, and they want to see you take a stand." But Marcus held firm. "I appreciate your concern," he told them, his voice steady but resolute. "But this isn't about revenge or making a spectacle. I need to address this in the right way, on my terms. He spent the following days watching and listening. He read the public's reactions, noting the overwhelming support, but also the dangerous undercurrent of division that the incident had stirred. He observed how Hartford doubled down on his rhetoric in interviews, painting himself as a victim of a woke mob while refusing to take responsibility for his actions. Marcus knew the moment required careful thought. He wasn't interested in fleeting victories or performative gestures. The slap wasn't just an insult. It was a reflection of the deeper issues he had been fighting against for years. To respond in anger or haste would only feed into Hartford's narrative. Instead, Marcus chose patience, allowing the world to see the stark contrast between himself and the man who had struck him. As the days passed, the viral video continued to dominate headlines, sparking debates about systemic racism, abuse of power, and the importance of accountability. Protesters began gathering outside Hartford's office, demanding his resignation. Petitions calling for an investigation into his conduct amassed thousands of signatures. The town, once divided, seemed to be united in its condemnation of Hartford's actions. Still, Marcus waited. He knew the time would come when he would speak, not just to address the slap, but to push for real, lasting change. Until then, he remained a quiet force of dignity, letting his silence speak volumes in a world that demanded quick reactions and instant gratification. His restraint became a statement in itself, a reminder that true leadership isn't about impulsive action. It's about knowing when to act and how to do so with purpose. The days following the slap were a whirlwind of activity in the town. Journalists, community activists, and concerned citizens dug into William Hartford's past, driven by the outrage sparked by his public attack on Marcus Bennett. What they uncovered was damning. Years of discriminatory practices, corruption, and misuse of power came to light. Reports surfaced of Hartford's deliberately blocking funding for housing projects and educational programs aimed at uplifting marginalized communities. Internal memos revealed his disdain for initiatives that Marcus had championed, labeling them as wasteful and pandering. Social media erupted once again, this time with hashtags like Expose Hartford and Systemic Corruption. Screenshots of documents, videos of former colleagues recounting Hartford's prejudices, and testimonials from affected community members painted a picture of a politician who had long wielded his power to suppress progress. Each revelation further alienated Hartford from the public, even among his once loyal base. The town's mayor, under immense pressure to address the scandal, announced a televised town hall to discuss the incident and the broader issues it had brought to light. Invitations were extended to both Marcus and Hartford, with the mayor emphasizing the importance of transparency and dialogue. The announcement caused a stir. Many saw this as a chance for Marcus to expose Hartford's wrongdoings on a grand stage. Hartford, however, reluctantly accepted the invitation, likely believing he could spin the narrative in his favor. When Marcus received his invitation, he took a moment to reflect. He knew the town hall would be more than a chance to address the slap. It was an opportunity to confront the deeper issues plaguing the community. With the support of his team, He prepared diligently, reviewing the evidence unearthed by activists and crafting a message that would resonate with the townspeople. The evening of the town hall arrived, and the community center was packed with residents, journalists, and local leaders. The atmosphere buzzed with anticipation. Hartford sat stiffly at one end of the stage, his face a mask of strained confidence. Marcus, on the other hand, exuded calm determination as he took his seat. The moderator, a respected local journalist, opened the discussion by addressing the incident that had been seen at the laboratory. Hartford, given the chance to speak first, launched into a defensive tirade. "This entire situation has been blown out of proportion," he began, his voice tight with frustration. "I've served this town for years, making tough decisions that others wouldn't dare to make. And now, because of one moment of frustration, my entire record is being questioned." The audience murmured uncomfortably, many visibly unimpressed by his attempt to downplay the situation. Hartford continued, doubling down on his earlier accusations against Marcus. "This man," he said, pointing toward Marcus, "has been a thorn in the side of progress, pushing divisive rhetoric and trying to undermine the values that built this town." When it was Marcus's turn to speak, the room fell silent. He stood, pausing for a moment to meet the eyes of the audience. "I want to thank everyone here tonight," he began, his voice steady but filled with emotion. "Not just for showing up, but for caring enough to demand the truth. What happened last week was not just an isolated incident. It was a symptom of something much larger." He began to outline the systemic issues the town had faced for years: underfunded schools in marginalized neighborhoods, the lack of affordable housing, and the consistent opposition from leadership to programs aimed at leveling the playing field. With each point, he tied Hartford's name to the obstruction and negligence that had stymied progress. "For years," Marcus said, his voice rising with conviction, "William Hartford has used his position not to serve the people, but to serve himself and his interests, and the evidence is right here." Activists and journalists in the audience began distributing copies of documents and emails that had been uncovered, detailing Hartford's actions. A projector screen lit up behind Marcus, displaying excerpts of incriminating communications. One email showed Hartford referring to a housing project as a handout for the undeserving. Another highlighted his role in diverting funds meant for community centers to unrelated pet projects. The audience's reaction was palpable. Gasps, murmurs, and even a few shouts of indignation echoed through the hall. Hartford shifted uncomfortably in his seat, his face flushed as he tried to interject. But Marcus pressed on, his words unwavering. "This is not just about me," Marcus said, turning to the crowd. "This is about all of us. It's about the people who have been ignored, dismissed, and disrespected by those who are supposed to serve them. It's about the future of this town and the kind of leadership we deserve." When Marcus finished, the room erupted into applause. Hartford attempted to respond, but his words were drowned out by the audience's overwhelming support for Marcus. The tide had turned decisively against him. For the first time, Hartford seemed to grasp the gravity of the situation. He was no longer just facing backlash for a slap. He was confronting the collapse of his entire career. As the town hall concluded, Marcus was surrounded by supporters, many of whom expressed their gratitude and admiration. Hartford, on the other hand, left through a side door, avoiding the crowd and the journalists waiting to question him. The night had made one thing clear: the community was ready for change, and Marcus was the leader they were willing to rally behind. The fallout from the town hall was swift and relentless. Within days, calls for an official investigation into William Hartford's conduct began to gain traction. Legal experts and activists submitted formal complaints to the town council, citing the overwhelming evidence of his discriminatory practices and corruption. Under immense public pressure, an independent committee was formed to oversee the investigation, tasked with examining both the viral slap incident and Hartford's history of questionable decisions. The committee wasted no time, gathering witness testimonies from the rally, including those who had been close to the stage and journalists who had recorded the incident. Marcus Bennett, though initially reluctant to participate, provided a measured statement emphasizing the need for accountability and justice. "This is not about retribution," Marcus said during his testimony. "It's about ensuring that no one in a position of power misuses it to harm the very people they are supposed to serve." The investigation quickly expanded beyond the slap, digging into Hartford's financial dealings and decision-making during his time in office. Financial records revealed misappropriated funds and unexplained budget cuts that disproportionately affected programs for marginalized communities. Further scrutiny unearthed evidence of Hartford accepting campaign donations from developers in exchange for blocking affordable housing projects, decisions that had directly contributed to the town's housing crisis. As these revelations came to light, Hartford found himself increasingly isolated. His political party, initially hesitant to act, eventually suspended him, issuing a statement condemning his actions and pledging to cooperate with the investigation. Several of Hartford's longtime allies, sensing the growing public anger, distanced themselves from him, either offering lukewarm defenses or outright denouncing him to save their own reputations. His once loyal supporters dwindled as more people questioned the integrity of the man they had once trusted. Meanwhile, the town erupted in peaceful protests demanding Hartford's immediate resignation. Organized by local activists and fueled by Marcus's leadership, the demonstrations became a rallying cry for broader reforms. Protesters carried signs that read, "Accountability now," and "No justice, no trust," chanting outside the town hall and Hartford's office. The movement drew people from all walks of life, unified by a desire for change. Social media amplified the protests, with videos and photos of the demonstrations spreading like wildfire. Messages of solidarity poured in from across the country, turning the local issue into a national conversation about systemic corruption and abuse of power in politics. Influential figures, including other activists and public officials, voiced their support for the town's fight for justice. As Hartford watched his career unravel, he issued a defiant statement, insisting that the investigation was a politically motivated witch hunt. However, his words rang hollow in the face of mounting evidence and widespread public condemnation. Every attempt he made to shift blame or downplay the situation only further alienated him from the community. The turning point came when the independent committee released its interim findings. The report painted a damning picture of Hartford's tenure, highlighting years of discriminatory policies, financial mismanagement, and a blatant disregard for ethical standards. Public opinion, already against him, solidified into outright disdain. The town council, under intense scrutiny themselves, called for Hartford's resignation, stating that his continued presence in office was untenable and damaging to the integrity of local government. Hartford resisted at first, refusing to step down and claiming that the investigation was biased. But as protests grew larger and his support base eroded further, he found himself with no allies left to defend him. Facing the very real threat of legal consequences and public disgrace, Hartford eventually announced his resignation in a hastily organized press conference. His tone was bitter, blaming media, blaming critics, blaming political enemies, blaming corporations, blaming kids in school, blaming corporations for his downfall, but the community saw through his words. With Hartford gone, the town turned its focus to the reforms they had long been advocating for. Marcus Bennett, now a symbol of resilience and justice, played a pivotal role in steering the conversation toward rebuilding trust in local governance. The protests, which had initially centered on Hartford's actions, evolved into a broader movement for accountability and transparency in government. A town's residents, empowered by their collective voice, began to push for policies that would ensure such abuses of power could never happen again. As Hartford retreated from the public eye, his career in ruins, Marcus continued to lead the charge for meaningful change, proving that integrity and perseverance could triumph even in the face of systemic injustice. In the aftermath of William Hartford's resignation, Marcus Bennett stood at a crossroads. The overwhelming support he received from the community following the incident had cemented him as a symbol of resilience and integrity. But Marcus knew that true change required more than symbolic victories. It demanded tangible reforms that would address the deep-rooted inequities in the town's governance. Marcus began his journey by reaching out to local activists, community leaders, and residents who had long advocated for change. Together, they formed a coalition dedicated to drafting actionable plans for reform. One of their first initiatives was aimed at increasing transparency in local governance. Marcus proposed the creation of a citizen oversight committee, composed of diverse members of the community, to review major decisions and ensure that public funds were allocated equitably. The committee's first order of business was to investigate the town's housing policies, an issue that had plagued the community for years. Hartford's obstruction of affordable housing projects had left many families struggling to find stable accommodations. Marcus worked closely with housing advocates and developers to propose new initiatives that prioritized affordable housing and ensured that marginalized communities had access to safe, sustainable living conditions. Education reform was another priority for Marcus. He collaborated with local educators and parents to address the disparities in funding and resources among the town's schools. Through partnerships with nonprofit organizations and grants, Marcus helped secure funding for after-school programs, mentorship opportunities, and scholarships for underprivileged students. These efforts aimed to level the playing field and provide every child with a fair chance to succeed. Recognizing the need for accountability in law enforcement, Marcus also pushed for reforms within the police department. He advocated for mandatory bias training, community policing initiatives, and the establishment of a whistleblower protection policy to encourage officers to speak out against misconduct. These measures were designed to rebuild trust between law enforcement and the community, ensuring that no one felt marginalized or targeted by those sworn to protect them. Marcus's reforms were met with widespread support, but they also faced resistance from certain factions within the town. Critics accused him of being too idealistic or of trying to dismantle long-standing systems. However, Marcus remained steadfast, addressing concerns with patience and evidence-based arguments. His ability to listen and adapt while staying true to his principles earned him the respect of many, even among those who had initially doubted him. Community engagement became the cornerstone of Marcus's approach. He hosted regular open forums where residents could voice their concerns, share their experiences, and propose ideas for change. These forums were often emotional, with individuals recounting stories of discrimination, neglect, and systemic failure. Marcus listened intently, taking notes and ensuring that every voice was heard. He believed that the path to progress lay in understanding the lived experiences of those who had been most affected by injustice. Through his leadership, Marcus became a unifying figure in the town. He encouraged collaboration between different groups, bridging divides that had long hindered progress. His humility and genuine commitment to the community inspired others to step up and contribute, creating a ripple effect of positive change. The momentum Marcus built extended beyond the town's borders. His story gained national attention, with media outlets highlighting his efforts to turn a moment of humiliation into a catalyst for transformation. Other towns and cities began to reach out, seeking advice on how to implement similar reforms in their own communities. Marcus welcomed these opportunities, sharing his experiences and lessons learned in the hopes of inspiring broader change. Despite the challenges he faced, Marcus remained driven by a simple yet profound belief that every individual deserved to be treated with dignity and respect. His journey was far from over, but the progress he had made proved that even in the face of adversity, meaningful change was possible. In the wake of his suspension and the public backlash, William Hartford found himself in an unfamiliar and deeply uncomfortable position. The halls of power, which had once echoed with his voice, were now closed to him. Former allies distanced themselves, eager to escape the shadow of his scandal. William was left with nothing but his thoughts and a mounting wave of public condemnation. For days, William remained defiant. In his mind, he was the victim, a man unfairly vilified by a community that had turned against him. He took to writing speeches filled with justifications and half-hearted defenses, but every attempt to rally support only deepened the silence around him. His words no longer carried weight. The town had moved on. Alone in his sprawling but now eerily quiet home, William began to sift through the articles and news segments detailing his fall from grace. It was impossible to ignore the outcry. People weren't just angry about the slap. They were outraged by what it represented: decades of prejudice, corruption, and the systemic failures he had perpetuated. Slowly, The truth began to chip away at the armor of his ego. One evening, a message arrived from Marcus Bennett. It was an unexpected invitation, a private meeting to discuss the future. One evening, a message arrived from Marcus Bennett. It was compelled him to accept, elicited an unspoken hope for redemption. In 10 days, he would find Marcus a mist, a leader and a teacher, curious, strange, impressive, glorious, memorable. He asked himself if he could go back, whether he wanted to or not. He asked himself if he could go back. People in the future traveled very fast. He asked himself if he could go back now. The meeting took place in a neutral, unassuming community center. Marcus greeted William with a calm but firm demeanor, extending his hand as a gesture of civility. William hesitated before shaking it, feeling the weight of the moment. Marcus led him into a modest room where 2 chairs faced each other, the simplicity of the setup emphasizing the gravity of their conversation. Marcus spoke first, his tone measured but unyielding. He recounted the rally incident, not as a personal grievance, but as a reflection of the larger issues plaguing their community. He shared stories from residents who had suffered under policies William had endorsed, and highlighted the barriers that marginalized groups continued to face. "You have a choice, William," Marcus said, his voice steady but piercing. "You can continue down this path of denial and bitterness, or you can acknowledge the harm you've caused and work to make things right. Redemption is possible, but it requires humility and action." William listened intently, his usual smugness replaced by an unfamiliar silence. For the first time, he saw Marcus not as an adversary, but as a man whose principles had exposed his own shortcomings. The candidness of their conversation struck a chord, forcing William to confront the reality he had long avoided. In the days that followed, William wrestled with his conscience. The idea of redemption was daunting. It meant admitting fault, something he had rarely done in his life. But the alternative, fading into irrelevance as a symbol of intolerance, was even less appealing. Finally, William took a step he never thought he would. He reached out to Marcus, offering to publicly apologize and support the reforms being championed. His proposal was met with cautious optimism. Marcus agreed to give him a platform at an upcoming community event, but with one condition. His apology had to be sincere and his commitment to change genuine. On the day of the event, William stood before a crowd that had once cheered for him, but now watched with skeptical eyes. He took a deep breath and began to speak. His voice wavered at first, but as he recounted the mistakes he had made and the harm he had caused, a raw honesty emerged. He acknowledged his prejudices, his misuse of power, and the pain he had inflicted on the community. "I can't undo the past," William said, his tone heavy with regret. "But I can choose to be better moving forward. I owe it to all of you and to myself to make amends." The reaction was mixed. Some clapped, recognizing the courage it took to admit fault, while others remained skeptical, unwilling to forgive so easily. William knew it would take time to rebuild trust, but he was prepared to face the long road ahead. For Marcus, the moment was bittersweet. He didn't expect William to become a champion of justice overnight. but he saw the potential for growth. More importantly, he hoped the event would serve as a reminder to the community that change, though difficult, was possible. In the weeks that followed, William began volunteering with local initiatives aimed at addressing the very issues he had once ignored. He attended diversity workshops, listened to the stories of those he had marginalized, and gradually started to earn back the respect of some. Whether his redemption would be complete remained uncertain, but his efforts marked a significant shift in a man who had once been unyielding in his prejudice. For Marcus, the experience reaffirmed his belief in the power of accountability and dialogue. He knew not everyone could be changed, but every step toward understanding and empathy was a victory worth pursuing. The reforms initiated by Marcus Bennett began to take root in ways that exceeded even his expectations. Community programs designed to bridge gaps between marginalized groups and local governance gained traction. Marcus's emphasis on transparency and inclusivity inspired townspeople to engage with local policies, and open forums became a cornerstone of change. The narrative of transformation spread beyond the borders of their town, sparking conversations in neighboring cities and eventually catching the attention of national media. Marcus became a household name, not for his confrontation with William Hartford, but for how he turned that moment into a catalyst for progress. His story of resilience, composure, and unwavering commitment to justice resonated deeply with people across the nation. His ability to navigate adversity with dignity inspired countless individuals to challenge inequity in their own communities. At the same time, William's fate took a divergent path. Stripped of his political influence and facing the weight of public scrutiny, he found himself at a crossroads. Those closest to him urged him to embrace humility and work toward making amends, but the decision rested solely on his shoulders. If redeemed, William emerged as a chastened figure, someone who acknowledged the harm he had caused and sought to make meaningful contributions to the community. He began attending Marcus's forums not as a politician but as a participant, eager to listen and learn. He shared his story at public events, warning others of the dangers of unchecked power and prejudice. Though his efforts did not erase his past actions, they demonstrated a genuine attempt to rebuild bridges. If unredeemed, William retreated into obscurity, a cautionary tale of what happens to those who refuse to evolve with the times. His name became synonymous with an outdated system of governance and prejudice that no longer had a place in the community. The people of the town moved forward without him, emboldened by Marcus's leadership and the new era of progress his reforms had ushered in. Marcus, reflecting on the journey that had brought him to this point, felt a sense of triumph not just for himself, but for the community he had fought so hard to uplift. He knew the road ahead would still have challenges, but the momentum of change gave him hope. As he walked through the town square, now a vibrant space of unity and collaboration, he was greeted warmly by residents from all walks of life. Their smiles and words of gratitude were a testament to the power of perseverance and the belief that even in moments of pain, progress could emerge. The story of Marcus Bennett and William Hartford became more than a local incident. It became a narrative of accountability, resilience, and the enduring possibility of transformation. It reminded everyone that change starts with individuals who are willing to stand firm in their principles. while extending a hand of understanding to those who need it most. The town square, once a bustling center of political tension and simmering division, now stood transformed. The late afternoon sun bathed the space in golden light, casting long shadows across the mural that had become the heart of the square. Vibrant colors swirled together to form the image of Marcus Bennett, depicted standing tall with his arms outstretched, a symbol of unity and resilience. Around the mural were phrases painted in bold strokes: justice for all, dignity in adversity, and hope begins with us. The mural wasn't just a work of art. It was a testament to how far the community had come since that fateful day. Marcus stood a short distance from the mural, his gaze fixed on the image that now symbolized so much. He felt a swell of emotion as he took in the sight of children playing beneath it, their laughter filling the square. Around them, vendors sold food and crafts, local musicians performed, and families mingled freely. The square had become a place of joy and connection, a stark contrast to the day when William Hartford's slap had sent shockwaves through the town. For Marcus, it was more than just a mural or a square. It was a reflection of a journey that had tested him in ways he hadn't expected. He closed his eyes for a moment, allowing the memories to surface. The sting of the slap, the gasps of the crowd, and the fiery humiliation that had surged through him were still vivid. But what lingered more deeply was the way he had chosen to respond. That decision to remain composed, to channel his pain into action rather than anger, had set everything in motion. He remembered the weeks that followed, the countless conversations with activists, allies, and even those who had doubted him. There had been moments when he'd questioned himself, wondered if he should have retaliated, raised his voice, or struck back in some way. Yet every time, he came back to the same conclusion. Dignity and reason were his most powerful tools. They had carried him through the hardest days of his life and had inspired the change he so deeply believed in. Marcus turned his attention to the square itself, watching as people moved about their day. He spotted a group of high school students sitting on the steps of the courthouse, their notebooks spread out as they worked on a group project. A young woman approached him, carrying a basket of freshly baked goods. She offered him a loaf of bread, her face beaming with gratitude. "Thank you for everything, Mr. Bennett," she said. "This town feels different now. It feels like home." Marcus accepted the bread with a warm smile. "It's not just me," he replied. It's all of us. Change happens when everyone decides to take a step forward." The woman nodded, her eyes glistening with emotion, before walking away. As Marcus watched her go, he thought about the countless individuals who had stepped forward alongside him. Each one had played a role in transforming the town, from the local artists who had painted the mural to the activists who had organized peaceful protests. Even those who had once been skeptical of him had found their way to the rebuilding process. His mind wandered to William Hartford, the man who had sparked this journey with his actions. Marcus had heard whispers of William's life after his fall from grace. Some said he had retreated entirely, choosing to live in quiet obscurity. Others claimed he was attending therapy and community workshops, slowly confronting the biases that had defined his career. Marcus didn't know which version was true, and he wasn't sure it mattered. What mattered was that the community had moved forward, leaving behind the divisiveness that William had once represented. The sound of approaching footsteps pulled Marcus from his thoughts. He turned to see a group of children running toward him, their hands clutching small bouquets of flowers. They surrounded him, their faces bright with excitement. "Mr. Bennett, these are for you," one of the children exclaimed, thrusting a bundle of daisies into his hands. Marcus laughed, crouching down to their level. "Thank you," he said warmly. "What's the occasion?" One of the older children, a boy of about 10, spoke up. "Our teacher told us about what you did for the town. She said you're a hero." Marcus felt a lump form in his throat. He looked at the children, their eyes filled with admiration, and realized that they were the reason he had fought so hard. They deserved a future free from the prejudices and injustices that had plagued his generation. He ruffled the boy's hair gently. "I'm no hero," he said. "But if I've helped make this town a better place for all of you, then I've done my job." The children nodded earnestly before running off, their laughter echoing through the square. Marcus watched them go, his heart full. He thought about his own childhood, about the struggles his family had faced, and the lessons his parents had taught him about resilience and integrity. Those lessons had guided him through his darkest moments and had given him the strength to lead when others might have faltered. As the sun began to dip lower in the sky, Marcus started walking through the square. People greeted him warmly as he passed, their smiles genuine and their words filled with appreciation. He stopped to chat with an elderly couple sitting on a bench, their weathered faces glowing with pride as they recounted how the town had changed. "It feels like we're part of something bigger now," the woman said. "Like we're building something that will last." Marcus nodded, his heart swelling with gratitude. "That's the goal," he replied, "to create a foundation that future generations can build on." As he continued his walk, his thoughts turned to the future. There was still so much work to be done, but he felt hopeful. The community's transformation had shown him what was possible when people came together with a shared purpose. He envisioned a town where every voice was heard, where every resident felt valued, and where justice and equality were more than just ideals. They were lived realities. The sky deepened into shades of orange and purple as Marcus approached the edge of the square. He paused, turning back to take in the scene one last time. The mural loomed large, its vibrant colors glowing in the fading light. It wasn't just a portrait of him. It was a reflection of the community's spirit, a reminder of what they had achieved together. Marcus took a deep breath, his chest filling with pride and resolve. He knew the road ahead would be challenging, but he also knew that he wasn't walking it alone. The people of the town had proven their strength and their capacity for change, and he was honored to stand with them. As he turned to leave, a sense of peace washed over him. The incident that had once been a source of pain and division had become a catalyst for unity and progress. Marcus walked into the twilight, his heart filled with hope for what was yet to come. The story of their town was far from over, and he was ready to write the next chapter with the community by his side. Comments below where you're watching from, and if you like and love our story, kindly subscribe our channel. Life, inspirational, and motivational tales that explore themes of love, unity, and patriotism. Stay with us always for interesting stories.